Diego Maradona. He was the most gifted footballer of his generation, and by the time he died, the world had already decided it knew how the story would end. A man who had spent decades pushing his body past every reasonable limit was surely destined to be destroyed by it. That's the easy version. It isn't the whole truth. In 2020, Diego Maradona underwent surgery for a subdural hematoma, a dangerous pooling of blood inside the skull.
The operation itself went fine. He survived it. Doctors sent him home to recover in a rented house outside Buenos Aires, under the watch of a private medical team hired specifically to keep him safe during his recovery. But being watched and being protected are not the same thing. 2 weeks after that surgery, Maradona went to sleep in that house and never woke up again.
The official cause of death was cardiac arrest, triggered by acute pulmonary edema and congestive heart failure. On paper, that's where the story ends. Except investigators went back afterward and looked closely at what his home care team had actually done and failed to do in the hours before he died.
What they found raised a question that still hasn't been fully answered. Was Diego Maradona's death simply the final chapter of a body that had been failing for years, or was it something that could have been caught and stopped by the people who were paid to be watching him sleep? That same question, whether a death was already written or whether someone else's failure created it, runs through almost every name on this list. Take Diogo Jota. Here was a Liverpool forward at the peak of his powers, weeks removed from lifting a trophy with his club, freshly married, with a young family and every reason to expect decades still ahead of him. There was nothing in his life pointing toward an ending. He was simply driving on a Spanish highway known as the A52 in a car built for speed, with his brother Andrés Silva beside him. Then, in an instant, a tire failed. At the speed they were traveling, a blown tire doesn't mean easing onto the shoulder. It means the car leaves the road entirely, with no time to correct. The vehicle flipped, and it caught fire almost immediately. Both brothers were gone before anyone could reach them. Nothing about Jorge's discipline, his fitness, or his caution could have saved him that night, because the danger was never something inside him to manage. It was in a piece of rubber, and it failed at exactly the wrong moment, on exactly the wrong stretch of road. If Jota's death proves that talent buys you no protection from the road, Pelé's death proves something even harder to accept, that even the greatest player who ever lived gets no exemption from the slow, ordinary betrayal of his own body. In 2021, doctors discovered colon cancer in Pelé. For a while, there was real hope.
Then the disease did what cancer does when it isn't caught early enough. It spread, first into his lungs, then into his liver, moving through him the same way it moves through anyone else on Earth, completely unconcerned with what he had done on a football pitch decades earlier. He spent much of his final years cycling in and out of a hospital in Sao Paulo as one treatment after another failed to hold the disease back.
By the final days of 2022, his body had simply stopped responding to chemotherapy altogether. The man who scored more goals than almost any human being in history died the way so many ordinary people do, in a hospital bed, worn down by something no amount of skill could outrun. But not every ending on this list arrives slowly, over months, in a hospital room. Some arrive in a matter of seconds, on a stretch of open road without a single second of warning. And José Antonio Reyes is proof that this exact kind of ending can happen twice to men who play the very same sport. Reyes was driving at speeds that may have exceeded 125 miles an hour when something in his car catastrophically failed. Either the tires or the steering mechanism. Accounts of the exact cause still differ to this day. What's certain is that the vehicle left the road and burst into flames. Reyes, along with his cousin, who was riding in the car with him, were killed instantly before help had any chance of reaching them.
2 men, 2 cars, 2 catastrophic mechanical failures. 2 football careers ended in fire on ordinary roads in the middle of ordinary days. And if you're already starting to wonder whether there's something almost cursed about footballers' high speed and the machines that are supposed to carry them safely home, wait until you hear about the one who wasn't even on the ground when it happened.
Emiliano Sala boarded a small private plane in Nantes, France, bound for Cardiff, where he was about to begin an entirely new chapter of his career, a fresh transfer, a fresh start. The aircraft never landed. It vanished over the English Channel, and for nearly 2 agonizing weeks, nobody in the world knew exactly what had happened to him. When investigators finally pieced together the plane's final minutes, what they discovered was quietly devastating. Sala was very likely already unconscious, poisoned slowly by carbon monoxide leaking into the cabin, well before the aircraft ever broke apart in the sky. He may never have known the crash was coming at all. In a strange, almost unbearable way, that detail made his death both faster and slower than it looked from the outside. His body may have already been shutting down long before the wreckage ever touched the water below. Not every death on this list came from something completely outside a man's control. A tire, a plane, a piece of failing machinery. Some came from something eating away quietly inside him for years, invisible. Gary Speed had just taken charge of the Wales national team, respected across the entire sport, seemingly settled into the next great chapter of a long and accomplished football life. Then, one ordinary morning, his wife found him in the garage of their own home. He had taken his own life. Those closest to him later pointed to the mounting pressures of international management, along with personal conflicts in the period leading up to his death. But the deeper truth of exactly what Gary Speed was carrying never fully came to light. It's a brutal reminder that the men who appear most in control from the outside are sometimes carrying something that no camera, no interview, and no trophy cabinet will ever reveal. If you or someone you know is struggling, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available to talk any hour of any day. Some deaths on this list happened on a football pitch, inside a plane, behind the wheel of a car built for speed. One happened somewhere far more ordinary, and because of that, far more devastating. Standing in a line, waiting for food. Suleiman al-Obeid was known across Gaza as the Palestinian Pelé, a nickname earned through pure skill on the ball and more than 100 goals across a career spent almost entirely in his own besieged home. In August 2025, he was among a crowd of civilians waiting at a humanitarian aid distribution site in southern Gaza when he was struck by gunfire. The Palestinian Football Association said Israeli forces were responsible for the shooting that killed him. Medical help could not reach him in time, and he died at the scene. One name among hundreds who have died in that same conflict, in that same kind of line, simply trying to feed their families. He had once been one of the most celebrated athletes to ever come out of Palestinian football. In the end, he died the way an alarming number of ordinary civilians in that same war have died. Not on a battlefield, but waiting for something meant to keep him alive. Football has claimed lives on the very biggest stages the sport has to offer, broadcast to hundreds of millions of people. It has also claimed lives in front of a modest crowd on an unremarkable Sunday afternoon in a moment of pure joy that turned in the space of a single second into tragedy. Biaksangzuala had just scored an equalizing goal, exactly the kind of moment that should have been the highlight of his entire week, maybe his entire career. To celebrate, he attempted a series of flips in front of the crowd. On the landing, something went catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. He came down hard on his head and neck, and the impact caused severe trauma to his cervical spine. He survived 5 more days in a hospital before his body could no longer fight off the damage. A goal that should have been remembered forever as a triumphant highlight became instead the very last thing Biaksangzuala ever did on a football field. Sometimes the real danger isn't a car, a plane, or a fall at all. Sometimes it's hiding quietly inside a man's own heart, completely undetected, waiting patiently for the exact moment his body is pushed to its absolute limit. Marc-Vivien Foé was playing in a Confederations Cup match against Colombia, running, competing, doing exactly what he had done thousands of times before without a single problem. Then, in the center circle of the pitch, in front of a packed stadium and a global television audience watching live, he simply collapsed. Medical staff worked on him for 45 straight minutes, doing absolutely everything within their power. It wasn't enough to bring him back. An autopsy later revealed hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a hereditary thickening of the heart muscle that had gone completely undetected through every single medical screening of his entire professional career. The exact condition that ultimately killed Marc-Vivien Foé had been sitting inside him his whole life, quietly, patiently, waiting for that one moment on that one afternoon. And then there is the death on this list that didn't come from an accident, an illness, or a hidden condition at all, but from other human beings, deliberately, over a single mistake made in less than 1 second. During the 1994 World Cup, Andrés Escobar deflected the ball into his own net, an own goal that helped eliminate his heavily favored home country from the very tournament they were expected to win outright. Colombia's shocking exit sparked outrage back home, some of it tied directly to enormous sums of money lost by gamblers connected to the country's drug trade. Just days later, outside a nightclub in Medellin, Escobar was confronted in a parking lot. He was shot 6 times by a bodyguard linked to traffickers who had bet heavily and lost heavily on his national team.
A single deflection off his own boot in a single World Cup match is the entire reason a 27-year-old man was executed outside a nightclub. Of every single name on this list, his is the only death where the person who ended his life looked him directly in the eye first. 10 men. 10 completely different ways for a life built entirely around a football to end without one anywhere in sight.
A heart that gave out after surgery meant to save him. A tire that failed on an ordinary highway. A cancer that refused to stop spreading no matter what modern medicine tried. A plane that never should have left the ground that night. A quiet collapse that nobody around him saw coming until it was already happening in real time. A line for food that became, instead, a line for nothing at all.
A joyful celebration that turned fatal in a single second of bad luck. A hidden heart condition that no test in an entire career ever managed to find. And a bullet fired 6 times over a mistake that took less than 1 second to make on a football pitch. The game gave every single one of these men everything they ever had. In the end, it couldn't protect a single one of them from the way it was eventually, brutally taken away.